when my granddaughter looked at me with wide, innocent eyes and said, "Grandma, I thought you were rich." I felt a sharp twist in my chest. That same week, I overheard my son and daughter-in-law whispering about keeping my money safe while I was folding laundry in the next room. I didn't say a word, but on my granddaughter's birthday in front of everyone, I opened a box that didn't hold a gift. It held the truth that would turn my entire family upside down. I used to think retirement would be peaceful. After 35 years teaching second graders, I pictured myself in my own kitchen, baking cinnamon rolls on quiet Sunday mornings, reading novels late into the night without worrying about Monday lessons. But life has a funny way of taking unexpected turns. At 67, I sold my house. The one where I'd raised Mark painted his bedroom walls 3 times to match his changing favorite colors and hosted every Thanksgiving dinner for decades. I told myself it was practical. Mark and Jessica had just bought a bigger place, and I wanted to help. The idea of living with them felt comforting. I imagined evenings with Lily curled up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, as I told her the same bedtime stories I once told her father. When I first moved in, it felt exactly like I hoped. Jessica greeted me with a bright smile at the door, helping carry my boxes to the guest room. Mark was busy with work but seemed genuinely relieved I'd be around to help with Lily. And Lily, oh, she was overjoyed. The first night, she insisted on sleeping in my room, saying it felt like having a sleepover with her best friend. I took it as a sign that I'd made the right choice. In those first weeks, I settled into a routine. In the mornings, I'd make pancakes for Lily before school, leaving little notes in her lunchbox. During the day, I'd tidy up the house, run small errands, and work on my garden on their back patio. In the evenings, we'd gather around the dinner table. Jessica praised my cooking, often saying how much she appreciated having me there. Everything felt harmonious, on the surface. Mark was always buried in work. He'd come home late, kiss Lily goodnight, and then retreat to his office. We didn't talk as much as I'd hoped, but I told myself it was fine. He had his responsibilities, and I was happy to help where I could. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed eager to keep things organized. She introduced a few house rules soon after I moved in. "Mom," she said one afternoon while we were putting dishes away, "just so everyone's comfortable, I think we should have some boundaries and shared spaces." She explained that the kitchen should be cleaned and closed by 8 p.m., so everyone could relax in the evenings. The living room, she added, was their family time space after dinner. I nodded, a little surprised, but I didn't argue. I told myself it was their house, and I didn't want to disrupt their lifestyle. At first, I brushed off the small changes. I started spending more time in my room after dinner, reading or knitting. But every now and then, I caught a flicker of something in Jessica's voice, a polite firmness, like she was reminding me I was a guest. I tried to ignore it. After all, she had opened her home to me. Lily remained my bright spot. She would sneak into my room after her parents went to bed, whispering about school, friends, and the stories she wanted to hear. She loved when I baked cookies on weekends, standing on a stool beside me to stir the dough. Moments like those made me feel my decision had been worth it. Still, there were little moments I couldn't shake. One Saturday morning, as I folded laundry in my room, I heard Jessica's voice from the hallway. It was quieter than usual, like she was on the phone. "Yes, it's fine," she said. "As long as she's here, we have control. Just trust me." Her tone was sharp, clipped, not the cheerful politeness she used with me. My hands froze over the neatly folded towel. I wanted to believe she was talking about something else. I wanted to believe she wasn't talking about me. I stayed quiet, telling myself I might have misheard. I'd spent my life giving people the benefit of the doubt, and I wasn't going to jump to conclusions. But something in her voice stayed with me, a tiny splinter in the back of my mind. Life in the house went on. I continued helping, cooking, cleaning, caring for Lily. But I noticed Jessica's rules became more specific. The pantry shelves were rearranged, and I was asked to keep my items separate so things don't get mixed up. I was reminded gently to knock before entering the living room after dinner. I told myself it was fine. This was their home. I was simply fitting into their rhythm. And yet, late at night, I would sit in my room, the house quiet around me, and feel a faint heaviness in my chest. Something didn't feel quite right. Still, I smiled at breakfast. I listened to Lily chatter about school. I kept my hands busy in the kitchen. I told myself I was here to help, to be close to my family. That was enough. Or at least, I wanted to believe it was. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those rare days when the house was unusually quiet. Jessica had taken a call in her room, and Mark was still at work. I sat with Lily at the kitchen table, helping her with her math homework. She was working through fractions, her brow furrowed in concentration, when she suddenly looked up at me with that candid curiosity children have. "Grandma," she said, tilting her head, "I thought you were rich." I blinked, caught off guard. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" She shrugged, completely unaware of the tremor her words had sent through me. "Mom and Dad said you sold your house and got a lot of money, but you still live here, so I thought maybe you don't want to spend it?" Her voice was light, innocent, but my stomach tightened. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. I forced a smile, not wanting her to sense the sting in my chest. "Oh, Lily, and people can have money for different reasons. It's not always about spending it right away." She seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to her fractions, but my mind stayed frozen on her words. "Mom and Dad said you sold your house and got a lot of money, but you still live here." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I went through the motions, making dinner, setting the table, smiling when Jessica walked in from her call. But inside, something had shifted. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in my room, replaying Lily's words. There was a sharp edge in my thoughts I couldn't ignore. Why would they talk about my finances with her? And more importantly, why would they describe me as rich but still living here? The house was dark, the hallway silent, when I heard soft footsteps. I thought maybe it was Lily sneaking in for another bedtime story, but instead, voices drifted from the kitchen. I moved closer, careful to stay in the shadows. Jessica's voice came first, low but clear. "Mark, we need to make sure Mom's money is safe. She's generous, but she doesn't always make the best decisions." There was a pause. Then Mark's voice, tired and defensive. "She's fine, Jess. She trusts us. That's why she let me handle the house sale." Jessica's tone sharpened. "Exactly. And as long as she's here, we can keep an eye on things. We don't want her making any sudden moves." My breath caught. I felt the words land heavy, like stones in my chest. As long as she's here, we can keep an eye on things. I gripped the door frame, my mind spinning. These weren't the words of people just looking out for my best interest. There was control in Jessica's tone, calculation. Mark said nothing in response. The silence was louder than any agreement. I stepped quietly back into my room, my heart pounding. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. For the first time since moving in, I felt like a stranger in this house. Not a mother, not a grandmother, just someone being managed. A wave of emotions crashed over me, hurt, disbelief, even a flicker of anger. But I stayed silent. It wasn't time to confront them. Not yet. As I sat there, my mind wandered back to the sale of my house. I had transferred most of the proceeds into the joint account Mark managed, trusting him completely. But then I remembered. There was still a portion I hadn't touched. A small investment I'd made years ago, in my own name, separate from everything else. For the first time that night, a tiny ember of hope flickered in my chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. Still, the heaviness in my heart didn't lift. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, the quiet hum of the house around me. I thought of Lily, her innocent face, and the words she'd repeated from her parents. I thought of Jessica's voice, cold and careful. I thought of Mark's silence. Somewhere deep inside, a truth I hadn't wanted to face began to take shape. This wasn't just about space or boundaries. This was about control. And control, I realized, could be taken back. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The house was still dark, Jessica's car missing from the driveway, Mark's office door closed. I slipped quietly into the small closet where I kept my important documents. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the folder, holding the house sale papers. I sat on the edge of my bed, flipping through the documents. The ink on the transfer slip stared back at me. Every cent from the sale of my house had been deposited directly into a joint account under Mark's name. My name wasn't anywhere on the account, not even as an emergency contact. A cold sensation slid through me. I had trusted him so easily, never thinking twice. I leaned back, my mind replaying moments from that time. Jessica's sudden bursts of kindness, the fresh flowers she brought to my room, the way she insisted on cooking my favorite meals. I had thought she was simply being welcoming. Now, those moments felt different, like soft cushioning to distract me from what was really happening. I told myself I needed to know more. Later that afternoon, while Jessica was at a lunch meeting and Mark was at work, I went to the home office. The desk drawers were neatly organized, but I found a small file box tucked behind a stack of old tax forms. Inside were property records. My eyes scanned the pages and my breath caught. Mark's name appeared on a deed I didn't recognize. It wasn't this house. It was for a small apartment in another part of town. I sat there for a moment, my heart thudding. Why hadn't he told me about this place? And then another thought crept in. How had he afforded it? I carefully returned everything, my mind racing. This was bigger than I thought. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning. It wasn't just about the money from my house. There was more beneath the surface, something carefully kept from me. The next day, I waited until Jessica left for her yoga class. I told Mark I'd be running errands and slipped away, not to the store, but to the bank. At the teller's desk, I asked for a printed statement of the joint account from the date of the house sale to now. The teller looked at me oddly, but printed it. I tucked it into my purse before returning home. That evening, I spread the papers on my bed. My stomach tightened as I traced the transactions. Large withdrawals, some in cash, charges from high-end boutiques, expensive restaurants, and a week-long resort in Florida. I thought of Jessica's constant talk about budgeting carefully and cutting back. The hypocrisy was sharp enough to taste. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my old texts with Jessica, reading them in a new light. There was one in particular that made my stomach churn. Sent to me the week after I moved in. "We're so grateful you're here, Mom. You make this house complete." But that sweetness curdled when I stumbled on a screenshot that must have been accidentally backed up to the shared photo album on Lily's iPad. It was a text from Jessica to a friend. "This house is basically ours now. She won't go anywhere." I sat perfectly still, the weight of her words pressing down on me. It was all clear now. Jessica's rules, the limits on my access to spaces in the house. It wasn't about comfort. It was about control. She wanted me in a role that kept me convenient and contained. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. A younger version of me might have confronted them immediately, emotions running hot. But the years had taught me patience. If Jessica thought I was trapped, she was wrong. I gathered every piece of paper and tucked them away in my own bag. I wasn't going to move rashly. Not yet. That night at dinner, I listened to Jessica talk about how tight things were financially, how she and Mark might need to revisit some expenses. She smiled across the table as if we were all in this together. I smiled back, hiding what I knew. Inside, my resolve hardened. This wouldn't end with a quiet surrender. A few days later, I decided to dig deeper into the mysterious apartment I had found in Mark's name. I went to the county records office under the pretense of needing some paperwork for my own taxes. With a polite smile, the clerk handed me a copy of the property file. I sat on a wooden bench in the quiet lobby, scanning the document line by line. My heart stopped when I reached the section on the purchase details. The down payment, every cent of it, had come from a wire transfer out of my personal savings account, made almost 2 years earlier. I closed my eyes for a moment, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly. It was my investment, one I had asked Mark to hold on to for me, back when I thought he was more financially savvy than I was. I trusted him, never checking the details. He had put the apartment under his name. The air felt heavier as I tucked the papers back into my folder. This wasn't just careless money management. It was a deliberate choice to keep me in the dark. Back at the house, I kept my movements normal. I made dinner. I asked Lily about her science project, but that night, after everyone was in bed, I sat at my desk, combing through more files. In one of Jessica's family planning binders, a collection of schedules, budgets, and plans she kept in the kitchen, I found a draft labeled Future Living Arrangements. My fingers tightened as I read. In neat handwriting, she had written, "Garage renovation for guest space. Potential move for Mom to free up bedroom for home office." I leaned back, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I could picture it. Me moved into the garage, out of sight, a quiet solution for their space issues. Then I saw another page, a note about the apartment, plans to list it for rent by summer. No mention of my name, no mention of my stake. I sat in silence, the walls around me feeling closer. It wasn't just about my money or even my space in the house. This was about erasing my place here altogether. I knew then that staying silent wasn't an option forever. But charging in with accusations wouldn't work. Jessica was clever. Mark was quiet, but his silence was complicity. If I confronted them unprepared, they would twist the narrative. I needed leverage. The next morning, I called an old friend from my teaching days, now a lawyer. We met at a small cafe away from the neighborhood. Over coffee, I explained everything. Selling my house, the apartment in Mark's name, the garage plan, the financial trail. She listened carefully, then leaned forward. "You have more rights than you think. The key is documentation. Get everything in order, and don't tip your hand too early." Back home, I moved quietly. Over the next week, I gathered copies of every document, house sale papers, bank transfers, property records. I scanned everything onto a flash drive and stored the originals in a safe deposit box. At the same time, I made arrangements for my small investment account, the one no one knew about. I transferred the funds into a separate bank under my sole control. It wasn't just about protecting money, it was about ensuring I had options when the time came. Every evening, I smiled at dinner. I listened to Jessica's updates about her plans for spring home improvements. I nodded when Mark talked about tight budgets and big plans for the future. I played the part they expected me to play, but in my mind, I was drawing a different plan entirely. I decided the moment would come at Lily's upcoming birthday. Jessica loved to host events that impressed the extended family. She would invite everyone, siblings, cousins, neighbors. It would be the perfect stage. In the quiet of my room, I rehearsed what I would say. I pictured Jessica's carefully arranged smile freezing as I revealed the truth. I pictured Mark's silence breaking under the weight of the documents in my hand. But most of all, I pictured myself walking out of that house on my own terms, not as a guest, not as someone being managed, but as a woman taking back what was hers. The days leading up to Lily's birthday felt strange, almost like watching a play where everyone knew their lines but me. Jessica fussed over decorations. Mark bought gifts. Lily was excited, asking if I'd make her favorite cake. And I did. I baked with her in the kitchen, her laughter filling the air, the scent of vanilla frosting blending with the hum of the oven. It was almost enough to make me forget what was coming. Almost. In the quiet moments, I checked the folder in my bag. The documents, the statements, the property deeds. I was ready. They thought they were moving me out of the way. They had no idea I was planning my own move. The day of Lily's birthday arrived with the kind of cheerful chaos that Jessica loved. The living room was filled with pastel balloons and glittery banners. The dining table set with neatly wrapped gifts. Relatives filtered in, offering hugs, compliments, and bottles of wine. Jessica floated from guest to guest, her smile perfectly polished, while Mark busied himself refilling drinks. I stayed near the kitchen, frosting Lily's cake while she hovered beside me, sneaking tastes of icing with a grin. Her laughter was genuine, and for a brief moment my heart softened. This was, after all, her special day. I wasn't here to ruin it, but I was here to make sure the truth was finally spoken. After the candles were blown out and everyone had a slice of cake in hand, I stepped forward with my own gift. "Lily," I said, holding a small velvet box, "I have something for you." Her eyes lit up as she opened it. Inside was a single silver key on a delicate chain. "It's not to anything you own just yet," I said with a smile, "but one day it might be. This key is a reminder that value isn't always about what you can spend. It's about what you protect." Jessica tilted her head, still smiling politely but with a flicker of confusion. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "That's a thoughtful gift, Mom," Jessica said carefully. I took a deep breath and turned to face the room. "Actually, it's more than thoughtful. It's a reminder of why people might think I'm rich, and why I'm not. At least, not in the way they think." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. The air in the room shifted. "These," I said, holding up the first set of documents, "are the papers from the sale of my old house. As you can see, every cent went toward the down payment for this home. I didn't just move in here. I built this place for my family." Murmurs rippled through the room. Jessica's smile froze. Mark's jaw tightened. "And this," I continued, pulling out another document, "is the deed to the apartment Mark owns. Except, as you'll notice, the purchase was made entirely with funds from my personal savings. I trusted him to manage it for me. Instead, I was never told it even existed." A sharp silence filled the space. Jessica glanced at Mark, her expression shifting from surprise to something colder. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. I took a breath, steadying my voice. "I've heard discussions, plans about my future living arrangements, about how I might be moved to the garage, about how the apartment could be rented, all without my knowledge, even though it was my investment." The room felt like it had frozen in place. "I'm not here to argue or raise my voice," I continued. "I'm here to make my position clear. I will be moving out, effective immediately." Jessica's face drained of color. "Mom, I think we're misunderstanding." I held up a hand. "No, Jessica. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is clarity. You've both made choices about my life and my property without me. Now I'm making my choice." I turned to Mark, my tone firm but calm. "You will either return legal ownership of the apartment to me, or I will pursue legal action. The documents are ready." Mark swallowed hard but said nothing. The room was silent. The only sound, the faint rustle of someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Then I looked back at Lily, who was still holding the key. "One more thing," I said softly. "I do have another investment, a significant one, and one day it will go to you, Lily. But only if you understand this. Wealth is not a right. It's a responsibility. And the greatest wealth you can have is respect for the people who love you." Her eyes were wide, her young face struggling to process the weight of my words. But I saw a spark there, a moment of understanding. I gathered my folder, straightened my shoulders, and looked around the room one last time. "I'll send for my things," I said simply. Without another word, I walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Jessica stood frozen, Mark stared at the floor, and the relatives looked on in stunned silence. As I stepped outside, the crisp air felt like freedom. I wasn't leaving as someone displaced. I was leaving on my terms, with my dignity intact. 3 months passed, and life felt strangely calm. My new apartment wasn't as big as the old house I'd sold, but it was mine. The living room was filled with my books. My kitchen smelled of the cinnamon rolls I baked on quiet mornings, and the balcony looked out over a garden that reminded me of the one I'd tended for years. I woke each day without tension in my chest, without wondering what quiet plans might be unfolding behind closed doors. I didn't hear much from Mark and Jessica at first. The silence was telling, but slowly calls began to come in. Mark's voice on the phone was different now, quieter, more hesitant. He asked how I was doing, if I needed anything. I could hear the strain beneath his words. I'd heard through a mutual friend that their finances had tightened. The apartment, now legally in my name again, wasn't there to rent out. Without my contributions, the weight of the mortgage fell squarely on their shoulders. Jessica's tone changed, too. When she called, there was no edge, no carefully measured politeness. She spoke like someone trying to repair a bridge they'd burned. I wasn't cruel. I listened. I answered politely, but I didn't invite them back into my financial life. That door was closed. The one person who remained constant was Lily. She came to visit nearly every weekend. We baked together, just like before. We read stories, took walks in the park, and she helped me arrange flowers in the kitchen. But she also asked questions, hard ones, for a 12-year-old. "Grandma," she asked one Saturday afternoon, "were Mom and Dad wrong about the house and the money?" I paused, kneeling beside her as we pulled cookies from the oven. "Sometimes, Lily," I said gently, "people make choices because they think it will make life easier for them. But when those choices hurt someone else, they need to be honest about it." She nodded slowly, taking that in. I saw in her eyes a seed of understanding. Respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. My life had changed. The family dynamic had changed. I still spoke to Mark and Jessica, but with clear boundaries. They no longer made decisions for me. I no longer allowed my sacrifices to be taken for granted. One quiet evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, a cup of tea warm in my hands. I thought about everything that had happened, the selling of my house, the whispered conversations, the birthday party where I took back my voice. Sacrifice, I realized, doesn't mean letting others decide your worth. I had spent years putting everyone else first, assuming they would value me for it. But value has to start with how you see yourself. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the apartment or the investments. It was about dignity, about not letting the people you love put you in a position where you stop recognizing yourself. A week later, Lily came by again, swinging her backpack off her shoulders as she ran into the kitchen. She sat at the table, unwrapping a pastry I'd saved for her. After a few quiet bites, she looked up at me with that same wide-eyed curiosity she'd had months ago. "Grandma," she said, "are you still rich?" I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Rich?" I echoed. "In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. I'm not rich the way people usually mean it." She tilted her head. "Then how?" I reached across the table, brushing a crumb from her cheek. "I'm rich in freedom, Lily. I have the freedom to live how I choose, to protect what's mine, and to spend my time with the people who respect me. That's worth more than anything in the bank." Worse, her face lit up, and I saw something in her expression, a mix of admiration and understanding that made every difficult moment of the past year feel worth it. The past had been heavy, but it no longer weighed me down. I had built a life that was my own, and I'd left behind the idea that love meant silent sacrifice. In the months that followed, I stayed true to my boundaries. I still saw my family, I still loved them, but I loved myself, too. And that, I realized, was the kind of wealth no one could take from me.